The moment Calvin Reese stepped onto his land and saw nothing but rubble, his chest tightened like a vice. The cabin his grandmother built, the garden she nurtured for 5 decades, gone bulldozed behind his back while he was out of town. And standing in the wreckage, smiling like she just won a beauty pageant, was Marilyn Dorsey whispering, "It's HOA land now." The last thing I expected when I left Chicago was war. But there she stood, Marilyn Dorsey, in a tailored beige pantsuit and a visor that probably cost more than my pickup truck, holding a binder stuffed with HOA codes like it was the Constitution. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She simply stood at the edge of the flower beds, hands on hips, frowning as if the hybrid azaleas blooming in every color of spring had personally insulted her. "Mr. Reese," she said, curling her lip like she tasted something bitter. "This structure violates several standards outlined in the Magnolia Crest Estates Covenant. My name is Calvin Reese, 50 years old, former partner at one of the largest environmental law firms in the Midwest. 6 months ago, I walked away from all of it. Corporate clients, courtroom battles, glass towers filled with false smiles, and came back to the only place that ever felt like home. My grandmother's cabin, built in 1967, wrapped in hand-planted magnolias and nestled in 5 acres of forest on the edge of the neighborhood, my grandmother never wanted anything to do with. She used to call Magnolia Crest a gated illusion for insecure money. She wasn't wrong. This cabin is on private land, I replied calmly, wiping sweat off my brow. From where I'd been restoring the porch swing, she hung herself back in '85, and not subject to HOA oversight. I handed her the deed original survey maps and a property line marked with iron posts still embedded in the ground. I expected her to leave after that, but Marilyn Dorsey wasn't the type to back down just because the law said she was wrong. "We'll see," she said, coolly flipping through her binder like it contained divine authority. "You might be surprised what jurisdiction means when community aesthetics are at stake." And then she turned and walked off like she owned the earth beneath her shoes. At first, I didn't take it seriously. I had law on my side, historical documents, chain of title, tax records. This wasn't a gray area, it was fact. The Reese property wasn't part of Magnolia Crest, had never been, and was protected under pre-incorporation status. My grandmother had been meticulous about that, but over the next few days I noticed things. Strange cars slowing by the edge of the woods. HOA volunteers surveying with clipboards near the fence. And then the markings appeared, red spray-painted X's circling the cabin stakes in the ground, with neon tape fluttering in the breeze like flags of conquest. The kind of markings contractors make before demolition. I called the county records office, immediately asking for any changes in status to my parcel. That's when I met Lisa Caldwell. Lisa, 37, sharp-witted and overworked, handled administrative filings for the city's planning office. When I told her who I was and why I was calling, there was a long pause. Then she said quietly, "You'd better come down here." I arrived within the hour. Lisa closed the door to her cubicle, pulled a folder from her locked drawer, and slid it across to me. "This is what was filed under your name last week," she said. Inside was a boundary reassessment request, complete with what appeared to be my signature. The form stated that I voluntarily agreed to bring my property under the Magnolia Crest HOA in exchange for community services and infrastructure benefits. It was a near-perfect forgery, but I'd never signed it. "The notary listed here hasn't been active since 2019, I noted aloud. "And this address is wrong." Lisa nodded. I thought it looked fishy. The file was pushed through by Harold Strickland. He's our county inspector, but he's also very close with Marilyn Dorsey. Too close. I didn't need more context. I'd seen this playbook before, just never in my own backyard. Within 48 hours, an HOA emergency meeting was scheduled. I wasn't notified. I learned about it from my neighbor Franklin Webb, a retired judge who'd lived on the outskirts of the Crest since before the first foundation was poured. "They voted your place unsafe," he said bluntly over iced tea. Showed pictures. Said the roof was unstable. Claimed fire hazards. Claimed your grandmother's garden posed environmental inconsistencies with neighborhood harmony. "Environmental inconsistencies," I repeated, stunned. "They're flowers." "Doesn't matter," Franklin said. "They've decided you're in the way." He looked at me with tired eyes. "Son, they've done this before. You're not the first." That weekend I was scheduled to speak at an environmental law symposium in Denver. It was a favor to an old colleague, and despite everything I left just for 3 days. I returned late Monday night expecting quiet and stars and the familiar rustle of leaves. Instead, I saw bulldozer tracks on the dirt road before I saw the devastation. My grandmother's cabin gone, not collapsed, not damaged, gone, flattened into splinters. The stone chimney she built with my grandfather's help had been toppled. Her magnolias dug up, the hybrid azalea beds trampled and scooped like waste. And in the center of the wreckage, staked into the soil like a flag on conquered ground, stood a sign future site of Crestview Botanical Garden, sponsored by Magnolia Crest HOA. Marilyn Dorsey was already there, flanked by two board members and sipping from a reusable straw like it was just another charity event. I approached stunned, breathless fists clenched. "What did you do?" I asked, voice hoarse. "We followed proper procedure," she replied coolly. "Your structure posed a safety risk. The board voted unanimously. As you're now within HOA bounds, we exercised authority." "I'm not in the HOA," I snapped. "That signature was forged. That document is fake." The court recognized it. She shrugged. "You didn't show up to contest it. It's done now. Perhaps next time you'll be more cooperative with the community." I stood in the ashes of my past while she adjusted her sunglasses. "This land will be beautiful when we're through. Real beauty. Something people can enjoy. Not this backwoods shack surrounded by overgrown weeds." She turned her back before I could reply. But I didn't need to. Because in that moment, standing in what used to be my grandmother's iris ring, the scent of lavender and crushed magnolia in the dirt, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about a cabin anymore. It was about memory, about family, about dignity, and about justice. They thought I would walk away. They thought they could bury me beneath their manicured lawns and rewritten maps. But what they didn't know, what Marilyn Dorsey never even thought to consider, was that I came from a line of people who believe the land you plant your roots in is worth fighting for. I had no intention of backing down. The flowers may have been trampled, but the soil remembered, and the fight had just begun. I didn't sleep the night the cabin was destroyed. I sat on a cinder block near where the porch used to be, staring at the scorched outline of the stone chimney base, my palms scraped raw from picking through the rubble. Bits of flower roots were still in the soil-broken stems of my grandmother's beloved azaleas, crushed under boot prints and backhoe treads. Her favorite bench splintered. The air still held the scent of freshly churned earth and diesel fuel. And the sign, that damn sign, future site of Crestview Botanical Garden. As if beauty had to come at the cost of memory. As if progress required theft. I stared at that slogan like it was mocking me. I wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. I drove to Franklin Webb's house before dawn headlights slicing through morning fog. He opened the door in slippers, his silver hair mussed, and didn't ask a single question. Just poured black coffee and pointed to his den. "Let's get to work," he said. Over the next few hours, we dissected every angle: property law, municipal codes, filing procedures. We knew Marilyn Dorsey hadn't acted alone. The speed of the demolition, the forged paperwork, the timing while I was away, it all screamed conspiracy. I called Lisa Caldwell at City Hall. She picked up on the second ring. "Calvin," she whispered. "I've been expecting your call. I have something to show you, but you didn't hear about it from me." I met her that night in the parking lot of a closed nursery on the edge of town. She handed me a manila folder thick with internal memos, expedited permits, and email printouts. "They're not just after your land," she said. "They've been targeting several properties near the forest perimeter. A luxury resort project. Codename Crestview Villas. Developer is someone named Bradley Kincaid." Ever heard of him? I had. Kincaid was a name you learn to watch for in environmental law. A slick, golf course-smiling land baron known for building eco-luxury communities on what used to be wetlands, preserves, and privately owned farmland. He'd been in trouble in 2 other counties but never charged. Marilyn wasn't just trying to enforce rules. She was clearing a path for profit, for development. My grandmother's flower beds weren't weeds to her. They were obstacles to money. The next day, Franklin introduced me to 3 residents who'd quietly fought similar battles: a disabled veteran fined into foreclosure over a flagpole, a widowed school teacher harassed into selling her home after planting milkweed, and a Latino family who received weekly citations over unauthorized plant species in their side yard. All lived in lots now listed as under consideration on a map Franklin obtained. The pattern was clear. Target, pressure, acquire, build. It wasn't just theft. It was surgical. And then came the box. I was clearing out what was left of the root cellar when my foot hit something solid beneath a pile of collapsed wood and shattered glass. A rusted lockbox, half buried, wedged under the base of the magnolia tree my grandmother planted the year I was born. I pried it open with a crowbar. Inside were old photos, a bundle of letters tied in ribbon, and legal documents, handwritten pages, sealed county records, and a folder labeled Reese versus. County Planning Committee 1974. My grandmother had once sued the county to preserve flower protective zoning laws, and she had won. Included in the box was a copy of an early county charter with her signature embedding land preservation and anti-corruption clauses into local governance. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just heritage. This was leverage. I scanned every document and made 3 backup copies. And then I waited. Sure enough, within days, things escalated. My bank account was frozen under suspicion of misuse of nonprofit funds. I didn't even run a nonprofit. My law license came under review following an anonymous complaint that I had falsified property documents. Clients canceled. Calls stopped. I received a citation for unpermitted structure on a tent I'd put up on my own land. Then came the arrest. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when a city police cruiser pulled up as I was checking the perimeter. 2 officers stepped out, polite but firm. "Mr. Reese, we need you to come with us." The charge disturbing the peace. Apparently my presence near the HOA office provoked fear and discomfort. I spent the night in a holding cell smelling of bleach and resentment. The only bright spot came during booking. A young officer, mid-20s, crew-cut nervous, looked up as he scanned my ID. "You're Calvin Reese," he asked quietly. I nodded. "You helped my parents 10 years ago," he said. "Eviction case. You didn't charge them. Just thanks." He slid me a business card through the bars before his sergeant came back. On the back of the card was a name and number, Dana Whitaker, FBI, Public Corruption Division. I called the next day. Agent Whitaker met me in an old diner off Highway 42 where the booths had duct tape on the cushions and coffee came in chipped mugs. She listened, took notes, nodded slowly when I showed her the forged boundary forms, the land development plans, the charter clauses, and the growing list of residents with eerily similar stories. "We've had our eye on Kincaid for a while," she said. "This confirms a lot, but we need more. We need someone on the inside." I gave her Lisa's name. Lisa agreed on the condition of anonymity and federal protection. She wore a wire to a closed meeting between Marilyn and Bradley where they discussed moving up demolition on the final parcels and containing backlash from that lawyer with the flower shack. The recording was gold, but it got better. 1 week later, I called Marilyn. I told her I was willing to talk. "Maybe we could settle," I said. "Maybe I could consider selling after all." She couldn't help herself. Greed made her sloppy. "You'd be wise to take the offer, Calvin," she said. "Those flower beds are worth millions to the investors." I recorded the entire conversation legally. Pennsylvania's a one-party consent state. I played the tape for Franklin that night. His hand tightened around his glass. She just signed her own confession. The final act came in a barn 15 miles outside Magnolia Crest. 50 people crammed in, former homeowners, neighbors too afraid to speak before allies who'd quietly suffered while the HOA tightened its grip. Franklin spoke first. Lisa followed. Then I laid out the plan. And right on cue, as we predicted, Marilyn and Bradley showed up. They'd heard about the meeting from a neighbor who'd been bribed to snitch. They arrived with 2 police officers, smug and ready to shut down this illegal assembly. But they didn't know the FBI was already there. Agent Whitaker emerged from the crowd with her badge and 3 federal agents. Cameras were rolling. Marilyn's face went pale. Bradley tried to leave. He didn't make it past the barn doors. As they were led out in handcuffs, Marilyn hissed at me, "This isn't over." I looked her in the eyes and said, "It is for you." And then I turned back to the people who had come not just to witness justice, but to join it. The fight wasn't finished. Not yet. But the seeds had been planted, and for the first time in a long time, the garden had begun to bloom. The night Marilyn Dorsey was led out of that barn in handcuffs flanked by federal agents was the first time in weeks that the air in Magnolia County felt breathable. The residents, once too afraid to even speak Marilyn's name, above a whisper stood silently in that wooden structure, some in shock, some in quiet joy. but all aware that something larger than any of them had just shifted. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The arrests had made headlines. Mayor Ruth Menard, developer, Bradley Kincaid, county inspector, Harold Strickland, and Marilyn herself were all facing felony charges from the FBI. But a trial had to come, and trials were delicate things. Evidence could be dismissed. Public opinion could turn. And despite everything we gathered, I wasn't naive enough to believe they wouldn't fight back with every dollar, every connection, every manipulative tactic they'd mastered over years of unchecked power. So we prepared. Franklin Webb, Lisa Caldwell, and I spent weeks organizing everything into a clear and chronological record-scanned documents, time-stamped footage, witness testimonies. Lisa had risked her career to capture city planning memos that proved budget kickbacks. Franklin found the original copy of the early county charter, signed by my grandmother, a charter buried so deeply in records no one thought to look for it. And in that yellowed parchment was the line that would change everything. Any land decision made under proven corruption shall be declared null and injured. Parties shall be granted restitution in triple. That clause, handwritten by my grandmother in 1974 and never repealed, was the nuclear option. If the court upheld it, not only could I reclaim my family's land, but every single fraudulent acquisition tied to the Crestview Villa scheme could be reversed and restitution would be owed to those affected. When the hearing day finally came, the town courthouse was packed. Reporters crowded outside. HOA loyalists scowled from the back row, and seated in front of them all were the defendants, now visibly less smug than before. Marilyn wore gray. Her carefully maintained image, a symbol of order and elite taste, was cracking around the edges. Mayor Menard looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Their lawyers, flown in from Philadelphia, came prepared to discredit us. They called the arrests procedural misunderstandings, the recordings taken out of context, the forged documents, clerical errors, and they claimed the destruction of my cabin was a regrettable but legally supported act. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the witness stand with a folder in my hand. Not thick, not theatrical, just deliberate. "My name is Calvin Reese," I said, voice steady. "And this isn't just about a flower garden or a torn-down cabin. This is about how a few people in power used fear money and fake paperwork to rewrite the rules for their own gain." I presented the survey maps, the forged documents, the photos of the destroyed cabin and flower beds, the bank statements showing bribes to Harold Strickland. I played the audio clip of Marilyn's phone call, her exact words. "Those flower beds are worth millions to the investors." The courtroom stirred. Then I played the video Lisa had captured at a closed-door meeting where Mayor Menard leaned forward and said, "Push Reese out, and Crestview Villas will break ground by fall." The final piece came last. I held up the original county charter. "My grandmother Lorraine Reese helped draft this," I said. "Section 14B states that in the event of proven corruption, all land acquisitions tied to that corruption must be reversed. And Section 15A, still active in this county's legal code, mandates triple restitution for any such takings." I let that hang in the air. The judge, an old hawk-eyed man named Judge Trent, who'd once served with Franklin, leaned forward. "Do you have standing to invoke this clause?" "I do," I replied, as her only living legal heir. Franklin stood beside me, then raising a file that included notarized affidavits, lineage verification, and original court filings with Lorraine's signature. The courtroom sat frozen. Marilyn's lawyers objected furiously, but Judge Trent overruled them. "Motion to uphold the Reese charter clauses is granted," he said flatly, "pending final review." The gavel came down, and with it the entire Crestview Villas project collapsed. Over the next 2 weeks, headlines spread like wildfire. FBI cracks down on HOA conspiracy. Corruption scandal rocks Magnolia County. Illegal garden resort canceled after land theft revealed. The Magnolia Crest HOA was dissolved by court order. All property seizures since 2019 were suspended for investigation. Dozens of residents came forward with stories, some heartbreaking, some infuriating, of how they were fined, manipulated, or threatened into compliance. The town council was overhauled. Mayor Menard resigned in disgrace. Bradley Kincaid fled the state under federal indictment. Harold lost his inspector's license permanently. Marilyn, once the Iron Queen of Magnolia Crest, was sentenced to 2 years of supervised community service one of her assignments being groundskeeping for a new public project rising on the very plot she tried to erase. The land where my grandmother's cabin once stood was transformed, but not into condos. I used the remaining documents in my grandmother's box to unlock something else she'd planned long ago, a trust fund. One she established in 1980 with a small inheritance and a firm belief in community protection. With interest in decades of untouched growth, that fund had become a $4.8 million legal reservoir. And with it, I launched the Reese Legal Garden Fund, a nonprofit that offered free legal representation to any resident in the county fighting HOA corruption or illegal land seizures. On the 5th anniversary of my grandmother's passing, we held a dedication ceremony on her land. In place of the destroyed cabin, now stood a new one, rebuilt with original blueprints, same rustic materials, same flower-wrapped porch, but expanded to house a small legal office and community meeting space. Around it bloomed thousands of flowers replanted by volunteers from across the county. Azaleas, wild magnolias, iris beds. Local children named sections of the garden after their grandparents. The space was no longer just mine, it was everyone's. A sign by the path read, "The Reese Botanical and Legal Garden, where justice takes root." Marilyn showed up that day not as a guest, but as part of her community service. She wore gloves and a volunteer shirt, hauling mulch under the eye of a county supervisor. At one point during the event, I caught her pausing by the main sign. Our eyes met. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. There was no venom left in her face, just the dull ache of consequence. I didn't smile, but I nodded once. And then I turned back to the crowd. I stood on the porch surrounded by former clients, neighbors, allies, and strangers who had heard what happened and believed in the outcome. I tapped the mic, cleared my throat, and said simply, "My grandmother used to tell me that when flowers bloom on honest soil, no concrete can bury the truth. What you see here today isn't just a park. It's a promise that we don't let power silence people, that we don't let greed uproot what matters, that when a community stands together, no HOA, no developer, no title forged in secret can ever hold us back." Applause erupted. Tears flowed. Children played among the garden paths. And for the first time since that awful day, I returned to find the cabin gone. I finally felt peace. The garden had returned. Justice had blossomed. And somewhere I knew my grandmother was smiling through every bloom that now danced in the sun. Sometimes the greatest battles we face aren't in courtrooms or public forums, but on the land we inherit the values we protect and the legacy we refuse to let be erased. Calvin Reese's story reminds us that standing up to corruption is rarely easy, often isolating, and usually comes at a cost. But it also shows us something even more powerful, that integrity, when rooted deeply, cannot be bulldozed by greed. This wasn't just a fight over property lines or a demolished cabin. It was a fight for history, for family, and for truth. The flowers that bloomed in Calvin's grandmother's garden weren't just plants. They were symbols of care, tradition, and quiet resistance. When those flowers were ripped out in the name of progress, it was a reflection of something we all fear, that powerful people can rewrite the rules whenever it benefits them. But Calvin didn't walk away. He didn't crumble. He gathered truth like seeds and planted a strategy that grew stronger with every attempt to bury him. The lesson here is simple but profound. Never underestimate the power of persistence backed by principle. Whether you're fighting an unjust HOA, standing up to a corrupt boss, or protecting a loved one's legacy, know this: you are not alone. There is always a path to justice, even when it feels buried under red tape and manipulation. And sometimes that path starts with just one voice refusing to be silenced. To our listeners, especially those who have faced unfair treatment, community pressure, or felt the weight of being the only one to say this isn't right, let this story be your encouragement. Don't give up. Gather your allies, know your rights, and remember, what is built on lies will eventually fall. But what's rooted in truth will bloom again. Thank you for spending your time with us here on US Daily Story. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, please consider sharing it. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter, stories that speak up when others stay quiet, stories where everyday people like Calvin rise up to become the voice of change. Until next time, take care of your roots, stand tall, and never forget, honest soil always finds a way to bloom.